Hey, Rob.
Hey, what's up, Mike? How you doing today, sir? Episode 73 of the Rock Show, and this
Wow.
is Hana Rocks.
Hanoi Rocks. Yeah. Probably one of the most underrated bands of all time. One of my favorites, actually. When I told you I wanted to cover them, I remember you kind of said you didn't know anything about them. Had you ever heard of them?
I heard of them, but I pretty much heard of them once the guy that got killed,
Razzle.
Razzo. After that, I never heard, and Razzo was a guy that came later on, which
Right.
we
He
were.
wasn't their original drummer, but his death would kind of make the band famous in some ways. In Motley Crue and Vince Neil getting in trouble with all that. Uh, Up until that point, not too many people had heard of the band, though they had just released their first American album. We're going to get into all that.
Yeah, how funny is it that when the time you heard about this band was when that tragic hit? Other than that,
Yeah, I knew of them. I had actually seen them that year, right when that album had come out, and it was at Danceteria, and it's the only time I was ever in Danceteria because they closed right not too long after that. I was like about 14, 15 years old. I got in with a fake ID, and got to see Hanoi Rocks. It was the only time I was ever in that place.
wow.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. But
so
they have a
Mike,
great story. We'll get into it, and I just kind of think like people dismiss them in some ways, but I think they're like a very important band.
oh, I think so. So let me ask you a question. What can you tell me about the formation and early days of this
Well,
band?
okay. They started in 1979 when singer Michael Monroe and his friend that he'd been friends with for about 4 years, a guy named Andy McCoy, who was a guitar player.
Yeah.
Now, Michael's real name is Matty Fagerholm, and Andy's real name is Antti Holko. Now,
Okay.
for the sake of the fact that Finnish names are very fucking hard to say, I'm just going to say stage names for these people, okay?
Yeah, they just changed. Yeah.
Yeah, because the real names are hard to say.
Yeah.
But they had been friends for about 4 years, and they had been in a couple of punk bands. Monroe was actually more than just a singer. He played bass, he played guitar, and he played saxophone as well. And the saxophone would be a big part of Hanoi Rocks. One time, Monroe auditioned for a Finnish punk band called Pele Miljuna Oi. Okay. And Andy McCoy was actually the guitarist. But instead, uh, future Hanoi Rocks bass player Sammy Yaffa got the spot. Okay. He actually was going to be the bass player, but then Sammy Yaffa got the part in the band. So these bands are kind of related. This Pele Miljuna Oi and Hanoi Rocks. The former members all switch back and forth. Um,
Okay.
McCoy was also the guitarist for that band, also. Now, originally, the lineup for Hanoi was Mike Monroe on vocals. They had a guitarist named Stefan Pizan. Oh wow, Pieznakti, something like that.
These
And
names are fucked up.
yeah, and they had another guitarist who had a name of Nasty Suicide, one of the best stage names I've ever heard.
Yes, it is.
A bass player named Neto Soininen, and a drummer named Pekki Sorola. All right. Andy
Yeah.
McCoy was not in that first lineup, but it was agreed upon. They had like a handshake agreement between him and Michael Monroe that he would join the band at some point, even though he was still in that other punk band. But
Okay.
the band immediately with that original lineup hit the Finnish club circuit right away. They had some original songs and they did some covers. They used to cover the MC5. They used to cover Cheap Trick,
And
and
the police
the
also.
Police. Right? Yeah, they had a cover of a couple Police songs. Now, at an early gig, Michael Monroe and McCoy, uh, even though McCoy wasn't in the band yet, decided on former promoter Seppo Vesterinen, okay, as their manager. They decided that this guy would
I
manage
was just
Hanoi
going to
Rocks.
ask you because their manager was kind of an interesting guy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was like a promoter,
Yeah.
and he was one of these guys that was able to kind of just lure in some of that bigger acts into Finland. Finland is one of these places that, it's in Scandinavia. I think it
Yeah.
kind of gets left out of a lot of the tours. People don't even realize there's places to go. You have Helsinki, which is the biggest city, I think.
Yeah.
But the rest of the country kind of gets ignored, probably because it's so freaking cold. Nobody.
But that manager had like Iggy Pop and Frank fucking
Yeah,
Zappa go
yeah,
down
yeah.
to.
He was able to get them in. Scandinavian fans at rock fans are insane. Okay, right now for the last, I would say, 25 years, they're known for death metal. Okay, a lot of death metal bands come out of Scandinavia.
Yeah, that's weird, man.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
heavy
they
on
had that
that.
whole like Viking thing going on with like death metal bands and all that. Some of it's interesting, but they're just known as very rabid fans. One of my favorite Scandinavian bands of all time is a band called the Helicopters, and maybe we'll do a show on them one day. They were out of Sweden,
Oh
so
yeah.
same kind of place, but um, they got this guy Seppo as their manager, and by the second half of 1980, the more solid lineup of Monroe, McCoy, Nasty Suicide, Sam Yapa, and drummer Jip Casino was put together. They fired everybody else, and they brought these guys in.
Wow.
All right. I think that had to do with their management. And also, McCoy was eventually going to join the band.
Yeah.
And he brought Sammy Yaffa from that punk band with him. So, it was kind of like, it always seemed to me, and I read Andy McCoy's book as well. It always seemed to me that they were just kind of waiting for that punk band to end. And then they were going to join Hanoi. It was kind of a weird thing. But once they got that lineup together, that was the real solid lineup that everybody started to, when they got popular, people were aware of.
All right. So they got together after the punk band. They dissolved the punk band, right? They just
Right.
came over and joined Hanoi Rock. So here's a question. Can you tell me about Stockholm and the early recording in London and stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, what they did in the fall of 1980, okay, and
'Cause
they were
this was
playing a lot.
interesting. I thought this was interesting.
It is. They actually relocated to Stockholm, Sweden, from Finland, which is not that far, but it's a big move. But in reality, they went there. They had no place to stay.
Oh
They were
shit.
homeless. They were homeless on the
Yeah.
streets, except for Andy McCoy, who knew a girl, and she had a little money and a place to stay, and that's where he went.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have to struggle for too long, because in November of that year, they managed to strike a deal with the Scandinavian record label called Johanna Kostanas. Okay, it sounds like a person's name, but that's actually the name of the label, Johanna Kostanas.
What a name. Yeah, I thought it was
Yeah,
the name
yeah.
of somebody.
No, it's not. It's an actual label. Don't ask me what it translates, but it means something. Um, and they put out a single called "I Want You" with the B side "Kill City Kills." Now, they got this deal pretty quick, and it's because they had a lot of drive, a lot of tenacity. Michael Monroe was begging on the streets in the winter, okay, for a
Wow.
time. So yeah, I mean, these guys struggled. I think they believed that Stockholm was the place to be, because it had a lot of connections with the UK and other places in Europe that they knew they could get to, and they would eventually get to UK. All right. But that single was out, "I Want You" and "Kill City Kills." Now, McCoy had kind of stolen the song "I Want You" from a Swedish band called Heartbreak. And
Wow.
he translated the song into English and said he wrote it. He got away with it. All right. And then the B side was a song called "Kill City Kills," which was like an old song he wrote as a teenager about this like Finland neighborhood called Kill City. It was like real tough neighborhood that he was living in. In January of '81, the band would go on a 102-day tour, which still stands today as a record for a Finnish band. Okay,
Dude, but
nobody
that's a
nobody from
long tour,
Finland.
right?
Yeah, that's like a show every 3 days. That's a lot.
Wow.
Okay, if you think about it. And it was on this tour that they developed their high energy show that they would be known for. Now, the second single, called "Tragedy," with the B side "Cafe Avenue," both were written by Andy McCoy when he was about 16 years old. That
Wow.
was released in February of '81. So, in a matter of 2 months, they had two singles out. All right. And they were playing a lot of shows. They were on a 102-day tour. Since January, okay, they also had been recording a debut album, and it was called Bangkok Shocks, Saigon Shakes, Hanoi Rocks. All right. And Andy McCoy and Michael Monroe would produce the album under the name The Muddy Twins. Okay. And that's kind of a take on the Glimmer Twins, which is Jagger and Richards. Okay. A lot of times when you look at Rolling Stones records, it'll say produced by the Glimmer Twins. That's Richards and Jagger. Okay. And that would come out also in February of 81. So they had two singles and in 2 months and an album out. Now, the biggest hit on this album was Tragedy, which is one of their best songs ever.
Okay.
And the album would actually make it to #5 on the Finnish charts. On it, they covered an old song from 1961 by Bobby V called Walking with My Angel. And another one of their classic songs was on that. It's called Don't Never Leave Me. And that was recorded for this album, but it would reappear as Don't You Ever Leave Me on their fifth album, Two Steps from the Move, which would be their last album with Razzle and that whole story.
Yeah.
Personally, I prefer the first version.
Okay.
Okay. Nothing wrong with the second version. I just think it's a little punkier, a little nastier, kind of like there's one line where he's like talking about her beautiful lips, and then he says, and I love the beautiful lips between your legs, like that. That didn't make the second version, but it's a good song. Now, after touring Finland and Sweden extensively through most of 81, the band decided in September to relocate once again. This time they were going to go to London. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, too, about Hanoi Rocks is they had the sense to know that they had to sing in English. English was not their first language. But most people in Europe speak English to some degree. So it wasn't hard to do it. But when you listen to Hanoi records, their English is pretty good. It's really not bad. Now, when they relocated to London by September 19th, they were playing their first London gig at the Marquee Club.
Yep.
So between November of 81 and June of 82, they had this busy touring schedule, but would go back and forth a few times between London and Finland to do some shows and some recording. They would release some singles, also some non-album stuff called what was called Desperados with Devil Woman on the back.
Yeah, Devil Woman.
Yeah, there was a single called Dead by Christmas, and Nothing New was the B-side. That came out in December of 81.
So these guys were pretty much releasing a lot of singles, or a lot of singles with pretty good B-sides.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They would do that. The albums and the singles would come out every few months. They really, like the first few years, they really recorded a lot. And what's great is they didn't oversaturate, I don't think. Even though some bands do that, they put out too much. Remember when we talked about Cheap Trick last week?
I was just going to say that Cheap Trick saturated, like they put out too much shit.
I feel that worked against them. But with Hanoi, I don't know. I think it worked for them because the live shows they were just touring like crazy. By January of 82, they would start making some music videos because that was MTV was starting to get big. You had there was an MTV. They would use promo videos for places that they couldn't get to. Okay, that's how videos really got to be. It was really promos for places that you couldn't tour or you weren't going to get there in time. So that's how videos kind of always were used before MTV.
Yeah, so like that, people can see how the band look, how they sound, and you can from there you can judge. Oh, you know what, these guys look kind of cool. I'll buy the album or not.
Like in the early '70s, the Rolling Stones made some promo videos off the Goat's Head Soup album.
Yeah,
and there's an episode of Don Kirshner's rock concert, which was a show that was once a week, which would always be a live band. But the Rolling Stones couldn't be on the show, so they sent a video, and it's them doing Angie and Silver Train and stuff off that album, and it's great because these videos became classics later on. They were playing on MTV and everything.
MTV used to be great, man.
In the first couple of years, they were, man. I'd say up until about 85.
Yeah, it was
You know,
fantastic. So,
fantastic.
so Mike, what can you tell me about Oriental Beat and Razzle joining the band in '92?
Well,
How did this
when they
change the
when they were
band?
making when they were making their videos in January of '82, they did it in Helsinki at a place called the Lepaco, and that was like a somewhat famous venue. They would shoot videos for Tragedy, the song Oriental Beat, and the song Motivating. All right, both of those last two were going to be on the Oriental Beat album. Um, that would also come out that same month. So January of '82, they got a new album out called Oriental Beat. This album was critically acclaimed. All right, and it actually got the attention of Kerrang! Magazine rock critic Dave Dixon.
Wow.
Now, I used to read Kerrang! A lot when I was like 13, 14 years old, around that time. And there would always be one article from him, not every month, I would say, but often. Okay. There would be an article from him with like the latest Hanoi news. Okay. And that was how I kind of heard of them, but I still hadn't heard their music. I'm like, I'm reading about this band, but I can't find their music. Their stuff is just not released in the United States. And I'm looking at pictures of them and I'm like, well, you know, they look kind of cool. They look kind of like the New York Dolls or some of the glam bands that was starting to kind of come out, but not really. Like when did hair metal start? Around 84,
Yeah,
pretty much.
84. Yeah.
83 maybe. So this was like around that time. But, this guy Dave Dixon would be writing about them and he was like the only guy that I remember at that point writing about that band. But he would continue to write about them even through the 80s after Razzle died and then the Guns N' Roses connection to them and all that. But
But he like
Tra-
loved them. You know that?
what's that?
He loved them. Like he was a real big fan of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people fell in love with them. They were a great live act. Tragedy was a single that actually was starting to do very well in Japan at that point. And in May, they released a new single called Love's an Injection. And the B side was a song called Taxi Driver. Both tracks were off of Oriental Beat. They were touring all over Sweden at that point. That was another spot where they were very popular. But by June of '82, they would be back in London permanently. And it was at that time that they met Hanoi Rocks super fan, and his name was Razzle.
Okay.
Now, Razzle
And they met
met,
where? They met in a Johnny Thunder show.
yeah, right. They met at a Johnny Thunders concert in London, and Razzle said he was a huge fan, and they had a show coming up, Hanoi Rocks, and he showed up backstage at their show, and he basically was like, "Listen, I should be your drummer." Okay, so the guy had balls, all right, and McCoy and Monroe were impressed, but they were at the same time they were seriously, they were impressed, but they were also considering his offer because Jip Casino had a bad drug habit.
Yeah, he was lumped up.
Yeah, he was lumped up and he wasn't reliable. Uh, he was always talking about killing himself and like he had a lot of problems. And they were like, okay, we're gonna get rid of you and we're gonna take our fan Razzle. And at that point, they had really kind of started to be a little tired. A lot of touring, a lot of back and forth between Scandinavia and England. Um, they were really giving 110% into this band. They were starting to percolate and do well, but the live shows and even some elements in their recording they felt was starting to lack because they were getting tired and bored in a sense. But Razzle reinvigorated them, and they admitted that he did. In August of '82, they would come out with their third album called Self Destruction Blues. Now, this album technically is an album of singles and B-sides that were never on any album, like that Dead by Christmas song and stuff like that. Jip Casino does play drums on all the tracks, but Razzle actually is on the album cover, and he gets the credit also.
Wow.
They took Jip right off it.
So did the other guys didn't sue or try to come after them?
I don't think so.
Wow.
I think the breakup was kind of, they threw him out and that was it. He had a lot of problems anyway. He would, I think he would have a band later on. I forget the name, but he would really have nothing to do with them after that point. The Love's an Injection single would go to #1 in Finland, and the album would make it to number 28. Now, they also got their first Japanese record deal at that point, and it was kind of based off the success of the Tragedy single, which had done really well. And they were on a label in Japan called the Nippon Phonogram Company. They also, at that point, would get offered to do a tour of Asia. And in January of 83, they would begin that tour, and Razzle was a big hit on that tour. The fans loved him. They would start that tour in Bombay, India, and it would continue on to Hong Kong and then on to Tokyo. And it was in Tokyo that they were received like the Beatles. It was a huge thing. It was kind of like what we talked about with Cheap Trick last week.
Yeah.
Okay. They didn't even realize how big they were. They were received by thousands of screaming female fans. Their hotel rooms would get broken into wherever they were staying. It was chaos. After Tokyo, they would play Vietnam.
Yeah.
They would do shows there, and that's kind of a typical Asian tour, at least at that point in those days. Vietnam, if you were an American act, you weren't going there. All right, because I think still by the early '80s, we weren't having any contact with that country after the war. But a normal Asian tour, you would kind of end up in Japan. That's usually how you did it. By April, they would return to London to record their fourth album called Back to Mystery City. They also did a short tour of Israel.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it turned out to be a disaster. They were not well received. They didn't like Michael Monroe. They spit on him. They thought that he was a woman. They thought he was actually an immodestly dressed woman. All right. And he couldn't leave his hotel room. They would throw rocks at him. They would spit at him. Okay. And, it just was a disaster. Now, Nasty Suicide
broke his ankle.
He broke his ankle on that tour. So it was a disaster. But they had a new single out called Malibu Beach Nightmare. And the B-side was called Rebel on the Run. And that was released in the late spring of that year.
Yep.
In May of 83, Back to Mystery City came out. Okay, around the same time as the single. And this was a big album for them. It was produced by ex-Mott the Hoople guys, Dale Griffin and Overend Watts.
Wow.
Yeah. They've since passed away over the last couple of years. Those guys are gone. But Mott the Hoople was a band that we need to do a show on, #1. But Mott the Hoople was, the singer was Ian Hunter. And he would be involved. We're going to talk about it a little bit in the next album. But with this album, it was the guys Dale Griffin and Overend Watts. Dale Griffin was the drummer of Mott the Hoople.
Yeah, because you saw them live, right? You thought they were pretty good.
Yeah, I saw them last year.
Yeah,
on the reunion tour, which was amazing. Michael Monroe is on record as like a humongous Mott the Hoople fan. So I think it was probably his idea to get these guys involved. This album also had Morgan Fisher on keyboards, and he was the keyboard player for the last album Mott the Hoople did called The Hoople. Okay, one of the last albums they did, the last album with Ian Hunter. They brought him in on keyboards. So right away, having keyboards was going to be a little different with this album. Andy McCoy would continue with his strong songwriting. He wrote most of the songs for Hanoi Rocks. You had tracks called Malibu Beach Nightmare, Mental Beat, Until I Get You, Ice Cream Summer, and Back to Mystery City, the title track. These are like classic Hanoi Rock songs. The album will get to number 87 in the UK and then number 6 in Finland. So they were starting to get, sell a little bit in England. They continued touring the UK and Finland until the summer when CBS Records gave them a record deal for the American market.
Wow.
And it was worth £150,000, which was a lot of money, but not that much. Okay, it wasn't like they wowed them, but anything to get them into the American market. That's what they
But
wanted.
you know what? That was good money back then in
It was
'80.
good money. Yeah, it was good money. It wasn't like $1 million deal, but it was good money. They had to split it, obviously. They would in August there was a label called Lick Records, and they would release their first 3 albums in England for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, and I can remember just vaguely kind of seeing some of these Lick record releases in the States, but they were really expensive. These albums were like, you couldn't find them. And if you did, they wanted like, $40-50 for them, which was a lot of money back then for an album.
Why? Because they
And
were import, or they were
they
just.
were imports. They were imports. They were, and they were sought after. Like people heard of this band, so they would only be like a few released, and they would make it. I remember like Bleecker Bob's used to always have Hanoi Rocks, like either in the window or like behind the counter. They'd have like a couple albums, and you'd look, and I'd be like, I remember one time I asked Bleecker Bob specifically. I said, "Can you take that down? I want to look at them." And he's like, "All right." I must have been about 15 or something like that. And I'm looking at them, right? And I'm like, I remember I had some money and I was trying to like get 2 for cheaper, but he wouldn't do it.
Not
I mean,
Brie Kebab.
yeah, I mean, if I'll give you like, instead of it being like 80, I'll give you like 65 or something for 2. He wouldn't do it. I'm like, all right, man, forget it. And I remember it was like, I couldn't buy them. Eventually I had a friend that had all the albums and he taped them for me. So that was like my early, uh, exposure to them was on cassette, recorded by a friend. But in August of that year, Lick Records would put out those 3 albums in England, and they were still touring Finland, but they came back in October of '83 for some shows at the London Marquee in December. Now these shows would be recorded, and there would be a live video released as well called "All Those Wasted Years." Great show. You can see it on YouTube. Okay, I had the video for many years, the VHS copy, and during that time, in December, Bob Ezrin, the famous producer who we've talked about a bunch of times,
Yeah, great producer.
Alice Cooper, Lou Reed, Kiss, right, the Destroyer album, and tons of other things. He was going to be brought in by CBS to produce them, and he came to check out those shows. And it was then, they all worked out. They agreed on him, and he was going to be producing the next album for CBS. Now, in early '84, the band and Bob Ezrin recorded the album Two Steps from the Move at studios in Toronto and New York City. Ezrin, knowing about their Montehuqua connection from the last album, actually brought in Ian Hunter, okay, to help with the songwriting. Now, Ian brought Jack Bruce, who was the singer from Cream.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's huge.
Yeah, it was a huge help,
Yeah.
and he brought a poet named Pete Brown, who Jack Bruce had worked with many times
So,
to help.
Mike, you tell me these guys all got another guy to another guy to another
Yeah,
guy to.
yeah, yeah. It was like you bring this guy in, bring this guy. Bob Ezrin had a lot of connections, and these guys were bringing in people as well. But the funny thing is, in the end, Pete Brown, being known as a great lyricist, they only used one of his lyrics for the song "Million Miles Away." It's the lyric, "Smoked a lot of sky, drank a lot of rain." Out of the whole album, that was the only lyric they used. Yeah, it's funny, But the band was satisfied with the album by the end of April, but Ezrin felt that it didn't have a hit song on it. All right. He felt they needed one more track that would kind of sell the album. And they recorded the Creedence Clearwater Revival song "Up Around the Bend." And that was a favorite of Michael Monroe's and Nasty Suicides. Both of them love that song.
That was a great song.
Yeah, it is. And their version of it is great. Okay. Now, between May and July, the band would go back to Asia and tour Bombay and Japan. And again, we were received with chaotic and rabid fans in Japan. But they also did a short tour of the UK and Scotland. Now, British magazines were hyping them a lot at that point. Everybody was certain that their new upcoming album would be a big hit. In June of '84, the single and the video for Up Around the Bend would be released, and it would climb to number 61 in the UK singles charts and get some airplay in the USA. I
That's
remember it.
huge. That's
Yeah, I
huge.
remember. I remember the video of them. It was kind of like a montage of them, like live shows, getting in and out of planes, getting in and out of limos, and stuff like that in the video, and showing them live. It wasn't like a concept video or anything. It was like a lot of live shit. And I remember that getting some airplay on MTV. And I remember hearing it a little bit on the radio, not a big hit, but just, check out this new band back when the radio mattered a little bit,
Yeah.
In July, that album, Two Steps from the Move, would be released. It was originally going to be called Silver Missiles and Nightingales. And I think they made a good choice changing the name, right?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. The Nightingales doesn't sit well with me, but okay.
Let me ask you, at this point, they're starting to get some success. They're moving into the U.S. They ready to start taking off. They got albums, and a lot of the songs were English. And then
well, the songs were always in English, but
Yeah.
now they got their first American release,
which is huge.
Now, yes, but unfortunately, nobody wanted to release their other albums, the earlier albums as well. Okay. It would be a long time before that would happen. But in November, they released the single Don't You Ever Leave Me and Oil and Gasoline. Okay. During that time, they were on tour with Johnny Thunders. They became very good friends with Johnny Thunders.
Wow.
Yeah. Which, when you read Andy McCoy's book, practically almost kills him because of all the heroin involved. But anyway,
wasn't that what Joey Pinto told us?
Yes, he said the same thing. It's
he
true.
would have wind up in a hotel room then.
Yeah. He said if he went on tour with Thunders, it's true. He did say that. When they released the single "Don't You Ever Leave Me," there was a promo video for that as well, and the sales numbers for the LP were coming in, and they had sold 200,000 copies, 60,000 in the USA at that point, and 44,000 of that 60,000 was in the first 2 weeks.
You know what? That's huge.
That is huge. There was a lot of hype in New York City. I remember seeing at Tower Records the album cover in a big, how they used to have the big signs inside that were lit up.
Yeah.
It was like, huge. And, they kind of looked like, if you didn't really look close, they looked like every other hair metal band.
Yeah, of course.
But they weren't. That's the thing with them. They didn't sound like Motley Crue. They didn't sound like, Poison would sound a year or two later. They had a very unique sound. They were, kind of like the New York Dolls.
Wow.
Okay. More like them than anything to do with the 80s hair metal. It's just they kind of looked that way. But after a Swedish tour in late in '84, they would tour America. And Michael Monroe would break his ankle on stage at a show in Syracuse, New York. And it resulted in some, canceled shows. That was kind of a setback because shows were starting to sell out pretty quickly and they had to cancel them.
But they canceled because one of the guys got hurt, right?
Well, Michael Monroe got hurt. Yeah, Mike, the singer, he was jumping off, I think, the drum riser or something. He was jumping around on stage and he slipped and snapped his ankle.
What is it with this band and broken ankles? Don't they pay the people?
You'd be surprised. It's very easy to break your ankle on stage.
But that's the second time.
If you're jumping around, but also in those days, not everything. There was no wireless for these bands.
Yeah.
So you had wires all over the stage. People would still, would fall down. They would run around. I've been to shows where people tripped over wires and fell on stage. I've seen that. And everybody laughs, but you hope they don't get hurt. But Now, this would be kind of a bad omen, though, because it would be the beginning of the end, really.
Yeah.
Because December 8th of that year, while they were on that American tour, the Hanoi members, except Michael Monroe, because he was still nursing that broken ankle, were partying with Motley Crue at Vince Neil's house in California. And the other Motley Crue members were there as well as Vince. And at one point during the party, Neil realizes they're out of beer. So he grabs up Razzle and he gets in his Pantera, okay, which was an Italian sports car. And they ended up going to a nearby liquor store to buy some booze and some beer. And on the way back, they get into an accident. And Neil, who was highly intoxicated, he survived, but Razzle was killed instantly.
Damn.
And that would be a death knell to the band. Okay. Um, the occupants of the other car were injured seriously. They had brain
Damn.
damage. Okay. But Andy McCoy and Motley Crue drummer Tommy Lee um, were, wondering what happened to them. So they started to look for them. And they came upon the crash site just as Vince Neil was being handcuffed and put in the police car.
Wow.
And they were told at that point that Razzle was dead instantly. And Andy McCoy called their manager Seppo, and he informed the rest of the band as to what happened. Now, this was a huge story. You probably remember it,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Now, they were following this. Vince did a couple of weeks in jail. Okay.
Yeah, in the movie Dirt.
And
None of you guys came and visited me. I was in there for 30 days.
yeah, right. Okay. And he got off easy. Okay, he really did, and it was like 3 weeks. Now MTV covered it all, and even the sentencing and everything, and all he got was the few weeks in jail and community service. And they said that when he was doing the community service, like there was groupies all over the place. He was probably getting blowjobs. Okay, so it's really kind of a when you see the movie The Dirt, they changed a couple of things
Yeah.
around. They had him in a Corvette. They didn't have him in a Pantera.
Yeah.
But little things like that. But it really, Razzle was the heart of the band. He was the new guy. He brought a lot of energy to that band. They were just starting to break into the American market. And then Vince Neil, being like so freaking wasted, shouldn't have been driving, kills him. And that incident actually changed the country, in this country, as to how we perceive drunk driving, because there were a lot of people that were following it with MTV, even people that weren't fans, and they were like, "Hey, this
I
ain't right."
remember the first thing that thing happened. It was on MTV.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
MTV News. Yeah, remember seeing Vince Neil in handcuffs in
Yeah.
court? Yeah, I still remember that. After this happened, the band would return to London, and they would do two dates that they didn't want to cancel. They had to cancel the rest of the tour, obviously, but they would do two dates, January 3rd and 4th, and they were in Helsinki. And these shows were broadcast all over Europe on a show called Europe A Go Go that reached 200 million people. So it was huge, and both shows ended up being memorials to Razzle. They needed a drummer, and luckily they got Terry Chimes, who used to play with the Clash. He
Yeah.
filled in. Now, after those two shows, Yaffa and McCoy had a falling out. Yaffa, the bass player, and Yaffa left and was replaced by bass player Renee Berg. Chimes would stay on, but Michael Monroe was making noises. He wanted to leave the band. That was it. And he wanted to quit, but the record label kind of convinced him to stay on and do a short tour of Poland, because in Poland, the single for Don't You Ever Leave Me was doing
Wow.
well. So I guess they told him, look, don't leave now. You got a chance to make some money. And I guess he figured, all right, I'll do it. He agreed, but he asked them, please don't release any of this live music we're doing into a live album. And they said that they wouldn't. But secretly, the last few shows of the tour were bootlegged.
Wow.
Okay. And a semi official release called Rock and Roll Divorce came out.
Yeah.
And I've heard this album, okay, and it's like awful. All right, those shows were awful, and it's kind of like like listening to a band like fall
Yeah.
apart.
So why did they put them out if they were off? I don't understand it.
It. I don't think CBS put it out. It was like a sort of a bootleg, but it wasn't like a total bootleg. Somebody major put it out. I'm not sure
Wow.
who it was, to be honest. But I did hear it once, and it's like awful. But Don't You Ever Leave Me would go to number 6 in Poland. But on June 17th, 1985, Michael Monroe would leave the band, and that would be the end, pretty much, of them, at least in the original incarnation. Um, Michael Monroe kind of fell off the map. Andy McCoy kind of fell off the map for a few years. Monroe would go on and release, he would relocate to New York City. And I used to see him around. Okay. He would be at CB's. Okay. Sometimes you'd see him on the street. Okay. And he had this shocking spiked out blonde hair. Okay. And he would be dressed in these like long scarves and, glam kind of clothes. Very cool guy. I never really had a conversation with just a, hey, how you doing kind
Wow.
of thing, but nice guy. He was good friends with Stiv Bators, okay, from the Dead Boys and Lords of the New Church. He was good friends with Johnny Thunders, Dee Dee Ramone. They all collaborated on things. They were supposed to be a super group uh, by the late 80s with Thunders, Bators, Dee Dee, and Monroe. And I think it was going to be called the Whores of Babylon or
I
something
thought it was
like
doing
that.
a call that don't do too much heroin to her.
It's called Dead on
Dead or
Heroin
hell.
Tour. Is that what happened? Yeah. But what you also started to see was a band on the rise called Guns N'
Yeah.
Roses. All right. And Guns N' Roses talked about Hanoi Rocks often. And in fact, they kind of did for Hanoi what Metallica did for the Misfits. All right. Metallica always wore Misfits t shirts. Guns N' Roses would talk about Hanoi and wear their shirts and say how much of an influence they were. And in fact, if you look at early footage of Guns N' Roses, like before they had Appetite out, look at Axl. His hair is blonde and spiked
Yeah.
out. He looked just like Monroe. Izzy Stradlin always looked like he was in Hanoi Rocks. He could have been Sammy Yaffa, the way he looked with the floppy hat and the scarves and all that stuff. He looked exactly like him. Um, Monroe would have a successful solo career. He would come out with an album called Not Faking It that did pretty well. I saw him on that tour. I think it was fall of '88
Wow.
at Sundance, which was a place out in
Oh yeah.
Bayshore on Long Island. I don't know if you ever were at that place. A little dive bar. It was a good club. They had a lot of like punk and metal bands played there. I saw the Ramones there a bunch of times. Uh, they used to have a show, a metal show on WBAB out there, and there was a DJ called Fingers, and he would do his metal show from Sundance all the time. It was a cool club, and I saw Michael Monroe there, and he was great, and he did a couple of Hanoi songs, and he did everything off his solo stuff. Um, and I had, like I said, also I had seen Hanoi right at the very end there at Danceteria. And then, to be honest with you, I would not see Michael Monroe again for about 16,
Wow.
17 years. Okay. I'm trying to think. Maybe it was was it longer? 88? No, it was longer than that. It was like
Wow.
25 years between 88 and 2014 or 15. He had started to come around again with a new band. In that time, there was always talk about Hanoi getting back together. And they would get back together, sort of, in 2001, between 2001 and 2007. Monroe would reform the band. Originally, it was just him as the original member, which I didn't like that at all. Okay, when I heard about that, I was like, nah, I got no interest in that. Okay, uh, then Andy McCoy joined up and kind of got a little interested, but I never got to see that lineup. They had some different people playing with them. They had a lot like a heavy, rotation in and out of different lineups. They would put out 3 albums. I didn't like them. They were different than what they had been doing before. It was a different kind of sound. It just didn't connect. And it the fact they even put 3 albums out is
Yeah,
pretty
this
amazing
band was
with that.
very
But
mediocre compared to anything that they had.
they had before, yeah. You want to see Sammy Yaffa and McCoy on the same stage, Nasty Suicide. Otherwise, it's not Hanoi. It'd be like Jagger taking the
I
Stones out
wonder how
alone and
come that
calling it the
didn't work, because
Stones.
it seemed like they kept the sound the same and everything.
It wasn't though. I mean, the music, the stuff
But
they
it's
released on
terrible.
those albums, they didn't have. It, it wasn't. I wouldn't say terrible. It was just different, and they just didn't sound like Hanoi. And yeah, I mean, terrible in the sense of like you wanted to hear that crunchy guitar they were known for. It just didn't have that. It didn't have that energy. Um, but that's he would have a bunch of solo albums that came out over the last 10 years, 11 years, and they,
Yeah?
they were pretty damn good. Michael Monroe. Yeah, yeah. I saw him at the Gramercy with Sandy a couple of years ago, and he kicked ass. He had that song called Ballad of the Lower East Side.
No.
You ever hear that song? Oh, you got to check it out. Go YouTube it later. It's called
Battle of the
Ballad of the
Lotus.
Lower East Side. He's just he's just talking about how New York's changed, and where he when he lived there, it was like junkies, pimps, and whores, and now it's all squeaky
What
clean.
would he think of it today?
That's what he's
No, but
saying.
what would
It's
he
not the
think
same
about it
anymore.
today when the
You know?
rents are fucked and people? It might go back.
Yeah. Well, it might. I mean, I in a way that would be bad, and in a way it would be good. I guess kind of start over a little bit. Maybe we'll get a little, street back to the Lower East Side instead of these people that are here
Yeah.
that we all can't stand, right?
It's crazy, man. This is crazy.
It is. It is crazy. We're going through some crazy times right now.
I
But
gotta
that's all
tell
I
you,
got
Mike,
for you,
that
Mr.
was an
Rossi.
interesting history that you gave me. You came to the plate with a home run with this one, man. A lot of information, a lot of stuff that I didn't
Thanks.
know. Because when you told me, I was like, I have no idea who the fuck these guys are.
Yeah, they even today they kind of slip through the cracks in the history of rock and roll. But people in the know, like I said, I saw Michael Monroe a couple years ago at the Gramercy, and that show was sold out. It was packed. All right, and he blew the
So they
stage
got a
off,
cult
man. It was
following. Then they
incredible.
got a very
Okay,
underground cult following.
they have a strong yes, and it's the kind of cult following. Guys like uh, Degeneration, like Jesse Malin, were like big fans. You would see them at the shows. Steve Conti, who plays with Michael Monroe now, he's well, he was on stage, but he was always a fan. Uh, the New York Dolls cult following, people like Thunder's
Wow.
cult following, all love Hanoi. Uh, yeah, and I think I saw Jimmy Webb
Wow.
at that show. Yeah, I think I did. Right, if I
It was
remember
a
right.
who's
Yeah.
who's of, hey,
So it
so
was
East
the who's
Side. Let me
who
see
of the
what I can
Lower
put
East
my
Side.
face in.
Old school, right? Old school crowd. Was there, and it was just packed. And he's great live. If he comes around, we should go see him. You'd enjoy it.
Wow. Fucking fantastic, man.
Yep.
So this is
Yeah.
Hannah Rocks and damn, Mike, holy shit. And you know what's funny? And the thing is,
You're a
once I
fan
started
now,
seeing
right?
like some of the music, and then I started looking up some of the video, I'm like, shit, This was an MTV. I remember this crap. It was like, holy shit.
Yeah, yeah, but it was on MTV, but
No,
it
but
wasn't
but
huge.
they had
It was.
playtime.
They did. They were wedged in between,
Yeah.
Motley Crue and Poison, but they were different. But they were different.
You know what commercial I love right now? The
They were
commercial
very
where the
different.
guy say we moving to our new home, but we got a rat problem. It's the rat and this rat playing in the roof.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that, and I looked. I saw that, and I went like, Stephen Piercy, the lead
Yeah,
singer, looked old as shit in that commercial. I was like, damn, that guy used to
yeah.
like the girls
But how
love that
funny is
guy.
that commercial?
Oh, man. Yeah, it is. It is funny.
Wow.
Rats in
So
the
Mike,
basement.
man, a
That
lot
is
of
funny.
information. You know what? They had a short history, but they did a few things. They sold plenty of albums, and you know what? That once they started making a wave, and fucking tragedy hit them.
Yeah, and from all different sides, and losing Razzle was
Yeah, that
just
was the
the death knell for them. It was like Zeppelin losing
yeah.
John Bonham. They
That's the
couldn't
nail
go
in the
on
coffin.
after that. Exactly. So
Yeah,
we
we
got
got
some
a lot of
shows
shows
coming
coming up.
up.
We got
I just want to mention
Nevada.
Nirvana, right? The making
Yeah,
of
never mind.
Nevermind. We're doing a show on we're doing a show on Black Flag. We're doing a show on the amazing and
Yeah, Peter
fantastic
Tosh
Peter
should be
Tosh.
fucking fantastic. That's what it'll be.
That's gonna be a good show. And we're gonna
Yeah.
go back to doing
Hey, do
video
you
soon
see that long on the comment that one lady did for the T-Rex show? Yeah, no, on
on Twitter.
I want to see it's on Twitter, but on YouTube she did a long thing, and I told her, hey, yes, look
No,
at
I
the
didn't see it.
comments on YouTube for the T-Rex show, and I told her, thank you for. She gave us like a history lesson too, like you did.
Wow, was she
No, she
correcting
was
me or
also
was she?
talking.
Was
So she was
she
more with the guy Steve Took. She was all about Steve
took?
Took. So she just
Yeah.
talked about Steve Took and
Oh, okay.
how
So
he would. Yeah. So when you read it, she wasn't nothing. She would say, "This is the little. I know you guys knew this, but this is a little something you guys didn't know about Steve Took." So that's what she pretty much. She's like a Steve Took
oh,
fan. So yeah,
cool. No, he had that Tyrannosaurus Rex band had a following, but um, what I got today was a tweet from I think it was either a T Rex or just a Mark Bolan
yeah,
fan club kind of thing. They said they loved the show and they
that's good.
retweeted it all over the place. Yeah, yeah, and I said
And
thank you and stuff and everything. And yeah, man, I mean it's we're
so
getting we're doing well. We're
so
getting out
the
there.
next couple of weeks, like the make, like you say, we got the Jamaica, Nevada, never mind. We got Black Flag, Peter Torch. Then we got Little Richard. We got
Little Richard.
Pretty Things, Captain
Pretty
Beerheart,
pretty
and
things,
the
yeah.
making of the Doors' first album and Bauhaus.
Yep, yep. So we got unfortunately the Bauhaus show in June is got canceled, but it's going to be
So, yeah,
rescheduled. So
guys,
we'll
we
do a little
got a lot
history of the
of
band in
stuff
the
coming
meantime.
up, a lot of good shows. Listen, give us your feedback. Send us a
Yep.
message on Twitter, on Instagram. And Mike, how can they reach you?
Okay, you can find me on Facebook under the name Michael Baker. That's my real name, Baker. You could find me on Instagram, Rocker Mike 212, Rocker Mike 212, and Twitter. I'm out there on Twitter as Rocker
Hit
Mike
him up, and
3.
for the rest of me,
So
you can
hit me up
find me
on
on
any of that.
YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and any social media platform that's out there. And if you want to download the show, we are on almost every single platform you can imagine. And guys, remember to listen to the
Yep.
Dick Manitoba show. It's a great interview. And if you do listen to the show, please give a review of his album Born in the Bronx. He can use all the support and all the help that he can get. So remember to listen to the Dick Manitoba. It's a fantastic
Yep.
show. Mike did a great interview, and Dick Manitoba got open on a lot of things that I didn't think he would talk about it. So
That was a
Hey, let me.
fantastic interview. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about that. And he also check out his own
Yeah.
podcast, Handsome Dicks, called "You Don't Know Dick." All right, and that's on a lot of the
Yeah,
same
he's on a bunch of platforms.
platforms
He's
we're
also you
on. I
can
think
also get the
Pandora,
show right off his
Spotify.
website.
Oh,
Handsome
yeah,
Dick Manitoba.
right, and
Yeah,
YouTube
another thing. So I was talking.
and
Charlie
YouTube as
Kelly
well, I
was
believe.
talking about like he said some of our best show was the three best show. He's still saying is the Al Diaz, the graffiti artist, and then
Oh yeah,
the Joey Pinto, and then the Dick Manitoba. He says it's great. You know.
yeah, yeah. Charlie's a good guy down in New
Yeah,
Orleans. Yeah,
definitely.
he's
Shout
great.
out to Johnny
Shout out to
Charlie
him.
Kelly. And you know what? Boogie lives. How about one of those?
Charlie, Charlie.
So Mike, for
Boogie.
everybody.
Let's not forget Boogie.
Oh
Boogie
yeah, I
did
saw
something
the
cool
thing.
for
You
me a
should put
few
that
weeks
up on
ago in
Twitter.
Tompkins
See,
Square Park.
so
You
people
saw
that
that
haven't seen
picture?
it can look at it.
Yeah. He put it. He made so he's a good graffiti guy, and he put some graffiti on the ground. Said
That was
Rocker Mike, and I was
fantastic.
sitting in
Yeah.
front of it on a bench. Pretty cool.
So
So
Mike,
yeah.
from
So
you and to everybody else,
all right.
remember, don't get drunk, get lumped up. See you soon. Have a good one.
Don't get drunk. Get lumped up.